Good evening. The story I am about to tell profoundly affected me for many years, and discussing it has never been easy. Revisiting that dreadful moment is challenging, but sharing it openly contributes to my healing, even though I recognize that the scars I bear may never truly heal. For personal reasons, I prefer to remain anonymous in this account, and I hope you can appreciate and respect that choice. I arrived in New York in the early 1990s to pursue my studies and acclimate to the surroundings, which is why I was still in the city during 2001, working as an event producer. I had undertaken numerous jobs before, but it was the events industry that genuinely captivated me. I lived in Queens and cherished the neighborhood, enjoyed jogging in Central Park, and loved sipping decaf coffee at my favorite cafe. In short, I was just an everyday American fully engaged in the New York experience. However, about a week prior to that tragic day, I began to notice some unusual occurrences. I had always had a good night's sleep, yet during that entire week, I found myself waking up abruptly at nearly the same time every night, 3:45 a.m. Initially, I would simply awaken feeling anxious with no recollection of any dreams, if I had even dreamed at all. I recall mentioning this to my mother, who lived in another state, and to my sister. My mother suggested an old superstition. She advised me to take a sip of water before going to bed and to take another sip if I awoke frightened, emphasizing that the glass of water should remain on the bedside table. Finally, she cautioned me never, under any circumstances, to put my hand on my head upon waking. Although I don't consider myself religious or superstitious, I thought it wouldn't hurt to try, as I was desperate to understand what was haunting me in my dreams. On the night of Friday, September 7th, I followed my mother's advice. I drank some water, lay down, and left the glass on the bedside table. As on the prior nights, I woke up utterly distressed, drenched in cold sweat, my heart racing, still without a clear memory of what I had dreamed. Once I regained my breath, I took a sip of water, but of course, nothing changed instantly. I got up and went to the bathroom, and that's when flashes of the dream began to return to me. I started to recall the nightmare I had just experienced, which was very bizarre. I found myself on a street enveloped in thick smoke, as if something were ablaze. Additionally, something was falling from the sky, pieces of paper ash, some of which were stained with blood. I looked around and noticed many people, most of them covered in dust and blood. A horrifying sight. I felt extremely unsettled by that nightmare. I returned to bed, spending a few moments reflecting on what it might signify. On Sunday morning, I shared what happened with my family, and my mother attempted to reassure me, saying it was nothing serious, but she would pray for God to watch over me. I spent the rest of the day concentrating on a presentation I was preparing for the representatives at Windows on the World. I needed their support for an upcoming event and couldn't afford any errors in our meeting, which was scheduled for Monday, September 10th, at 11 a.m. On Monday at around 9 a.m., I got a call informing me they wanted to postpone the meeting until the following Friday due to unexpected scheduling issues with the person in charge, but I would be out of state that day. I suggested we meet on Tuesday morning instead, and we agreed on that plan. By the end of the day, I was organizing documents for the next day's meeting and going over the final key points when I noticed my wristwatch had stopped at 8:45. I thought perhaps the battery had died or something similar. I replaced it at home, but the watch still wouldn't function. Since I had more than one watch, I picked a different one that would match my outfit for the meeting on Tuesday, September 11th. I woke up around 6 a.m., took a shower, made a substantial breakfast, got dressed, and left. When I checked my watch, I noticed it too had stopped, again showing 8:45. This seemed unbelievable. 2 different watches frozen at the same time. Frustrated, I took it off and placed it in my bag. That Tuesday morning, I had a crucial meeting on the 96th floor of the North Tower, where I was set to finalize a contract for a series of cultural presentations at Windows on the World. While on the subway, something even stranger occurred. I was prepared to get off when an elderly woman suddenly grasped my arm with unexpected strength. I looked at her in surprise. She had an odd expression, almost with a milky, vacant gaze. Assuming she might be blind, I asked if she needed assistance getting off the train, and that's when she uttered something that sent chills through me. "It's going to rain. Ashes will fall from the sky." She then gave me a disturbingly eerie smile, and as soon as the doors opened, she vanished into the crowd. I arrived at the World Trade Center around 8 a.m., but one of the clocks in the lobby indicated 8:45, sending a shiver down my spine. Nevertheless, I tried to push the thought aside. My meeting was set for 9:15. Since I arrived well ahead of time, I decided to step over to the coffee shop across the street for another cup and give my documents a final review. That's where I bumped into an old friend I hadn't seen in months, and we ended up chatting, causing me to forget my presentation folder on the counter. The moment I realized something was missing, at 8:40, I hurried back inside the WTC. The elevator was packed, as usual for that time of day, and we were between the 22nd and 23rd floors when there was a violent impact. The lights flickered, the elevator shook, and it stopped. A strong smell of fuel started to seep in through the cracks, and we were trapped for what seemed like an eternity. One woman started having a panic attack, and I tried to calm her, but I was having trouble breathing. Then we heard voices, and the firefighters forced open the doors and took the emergency stairs. One of them yelled, and we descended 22 floors on foot, my legs shaking and the smoke smelled growing stronger. Papers swirling everywhere like a gloomy snowstorm is something I will never forget once we arrived at the ground floor. Disoriented, I hurried outside and saw people looking up in horror before I noticed bodies falling. When one landed a few yards away, the sound was like a vision of hell: screams, moans, sirens, and body parts hitting the ground. I was running aimlessly when a photographer from the New York Times grabbed me and dragged me behind a van. A few seconds later, we heard a deafening roar as the tower collapsed. A cloud of dust and debris engulfed us, making it impossible for me to see or breathe. The photographer covered my mouth and nose with a moist cloth, and we huddled there for what seemed like an eternity. After the dust settled, I started to walking for hours while covered in ash, until I eventually arrived at my Queens home. In the days that followed, I was in a state of shock for weeks, and I discovered that everyone who was at Windows on the World that morning had died. If I hadn't forgotten that folder or stopped at that coffee shop for a moment, that I appreciate you listening. Have you or someone you know ever come dangerously close to a terrible event? If so, please share your story in the comments section. Now, more than 20 years later, I still wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of the towers falling and the sound of bodies hitting the ground. Some wounds never fully heal. Good evening. I'm Harry, and today I want to tell you the story of my Uncle Joe, a man who, despite his tragic death, remains present in our lives in ways that are hard to comprehend. Uncle Joe was a highly regarded broker at Morgan Stanley, working on the 9th floor of the South Tower of the World Trade Center. He was a person of logic and reason, someone who believed only in things he could see or touch. Perhaps that is why the events leading up to his death and everything that followed are even more compelling. On the morning of Monday, September 10th, 2001, Uncle Joe arrived at the office incredibly early. He locked himself in his office and spent several hours writing letters, one for each of our family members. When his secretary, puzzled by his actions, asked what he was doing, he replied with an enigmatic statement. "I have a bad feeling, a really bad feeling." That night, he contacted my mother, his only sister. According to her, the conversation was unusual, filled with nostalgia and urgency that was not characteristic of him. He reminisced about childhood moments that seemed long forgotten, sought forgiveness for past misunderstandings, and expressed gratitude for everything they had experienced together. Before ending the call, he added one final message: "Take care of everyone for me." The next day, September 11th, Uncle Joe was in a meeting on the 93rd floor when the second hijacked plane struck the South Tower, exactly where he was located at that moment. His body was never recovered, lost in the flames and debris of that tragic day. However, Uncle Joe's story does not conclude there. In the months following the tragedy, unusual happenings began to take place in his wife Mary's house. The first incident involved Joe's cherished armchair, that old brown lazy boy he would use to read the Wall Street Journal for hours. Mary started to notice the chair gently rocking as if someone had just gotten up from it. Curious but not yet worried, she decided to dispose of the chair by donating it to a charity sale. Later, in 2003, during a family gathering, we took a photograph in front of the fireplace. When we developed the picture, the shock was unanimous. Uncle Joe appeared, sitting in his armchair with his trademark smile. The unsettling detail? The armchair had been donated months prior. Over the years, Aunt Mary recounted many encounters with Joe's spirit. Sometimes it was merely a silhouette passing through the hallway. Other times she would hear him in the kitchen early in the morning as if he were enjoying his coffee. In these apparitions, he never spoke. He only smiled mysteriously before disappearing. The most recent and striking appearance occurred on Thanksgiving Day 2024 during a family dinner. My cousin Susan, who was 15 at the time and had never met Uncle Joe, took a selfie with all of us. When we looked at the photo, a collective chill swept through the room. A translucent figure appeared behind the empty chair we always leave in memory of Joe. The image was so clear that we could recognize every detail. The navy blue suit he wore on that fateful day, the Rolex watch he received on his 25th anniversary at the company, and even the small scar above his right eyebrow from a childhood bicycle accident. It was unmistakably Uncle Joe, yet something about this last photo unsettles us deeply. The smile on his face seems slightly off, with a subtle disconcerting difference that I can't quite articulate. His eyes appear darker and deeper, as if they hold secrets meant for no one living. Aunt Mary keeps all these photos as silent witnesses to a presence that refuses to leave, stored in a special album. Sometimes, when I find her lost in these pictures, particularly the last one, I ask if she notices anything different or disturbing about that final image. She just offers a sad, resigned smile and responds that some questions lack answers, and perhaps it's best that way. I wonder, is it truly Uncle Joe's spirit maintaining his connection with us after his tragic passing? Or could it be something darker, an unknown entity taking on his form for motives we can't understand? I want to believe it's the former, cherishing the comforting thought that his love for us transcends death. Yet, that enigmatic smile in the last photo and the eyes that seem to conceal unfathomable secrets still send chills down my spine, making me question how much we truly understand about what exists beyond the veil of life and death. Maybe Aunt Mary is correct. Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. Some questions should stay unanswered. But one thing is certain: Uncle Joe's presence, whether a comforting gift from beyond or something more inscrutable, will be with us forever, woven into our memories and the inexplicable events that shape our lives. This is a story I share to encourage reflections on the bonds that connect us, on what endures when all else is gone, and on the mysteries we may never fully understand. I hope Uncle Joe's story prompts you to think, question, and perhaps examine your own family photographs a bit more closely. Thank you for listening, and may we face the unknown not with fear, but with the courage to embrace the mystery of life and whatever lies beyond it. Sincerely, Michael. I'd also like to thank everyone who has shared their own stories, and thank you for watching. If you want to support the channel, please subscribe, like, and share. Good evening. everyone. My name is Gary, and I've been a resident of New Jersey since 1990. The story I'm about to recount took place in the early 2000s, and even now, the memories of that day continue to haunt me. In 2001, I was employed as a security guard at the World Trade Center, where I had worked for nearly 2 years. My primary responsibility was to cover the main lobby of the South Tower, a job that was generally quite calm, and thankfully, I had never faced any serious situations until that point. Typically, my commute to the WTC took about 30 to 40 minutes. I usually arrived early so I could change in the locker room and chat with the night shift staff. However, in September 2001, some unusual occurrences began to unfold. As I mentioned, I always got there early, but on at least 2 consecutive occasions I found myself late. Both times, I was furious, as I'm a very dedicated individual and detest being late for anything. I see it as disrespectful. The first instance happened approximately 2 weeks prior to the attacks. The night before, I struggled to fall asleep, and when I finally did, it was a very light sleep. I kept waking up frequently, and my alarm clock failed to go off that morning, leading me to wake up extremely late. I received a mild reprimand from my boss, but I wasn't particularly upset about it. The second time I was late occurred about 2 days before the attack, and this time it was even worse. Once again, I had trouble sleeping, and when I finally managed to drift off, I experienced a very peculiar dream filled with thick smoke, fire, and people crying, pieces of bodies on streets, but I couldn't determine where I was in the dream. I remember waking up in a startled state that night, and my wife was worried, given that I rarely had nightmares. After that unsettling dream, I remained awake for the rest of the night, not out of fear, but because sleep eluded me. I felt a deep sense of anguish in my chest, an odd sensation reminiscent of an invisible hand squeezing my heart. It was so uncomfortable that I even began to fear I might be experiencing the onset of a heart attack or perhaps an anxiety episode. As soon as dawn broke, I began preparing for work. I took a shower, got dressed, and had a quick cup of coffee. I still had ample time, so I didn't believe I would be late. However, to my surprise, everything went wrong that day. First, the traffic was unusually heavy, requiring several detours, and then I got stuck again due to road work. By that time, frustration was mounting because I knew I'd be reprimanded again, something I truly loathed. Once I finally arrived, I indeed faced reprimand, and since I hadn't been there that morning when the schedule was altered, I ended up having to work on September 11th, but not during my usual hours. I was assigned the night shift, starting on the 10th and going straight through until 9 a.m. on the 11th. I despised working that shift, but I had no basis to complain. Had I been present when the schedule was posted, I might have been able to argue my case, but by then it was far too late. That evening when I arrived home, I informed my wife about the change in the schedule. She was unhappy because we had planned for the night of the 10th, which we now needed to postpone. On the night of September 10th, I started getting ready for work at around 8 p.m. My wife prepared a small meal for me to take with me, and as I was about to leave, she unexpectedly hugged me tightly from behind, something she had never done before. I told her I loved her and mentioned that I would return around 10 a.m., not realizing that day would turn into the longest one of my life. I reached work by 8 p.m., and everything appeared to be normal. I conducted my rounds and then sat down with the other night shift guard, and we conversed about various topics to pass the time. Suddenly, something strange occurred. A peculiar man stopped in front of the building, resembling a drifter or one of those street preachers carrying signs about the end of the world. He raised a piece of cardboard with a message and pressed it against the glass. I don't remember exactly what it said, but it was something regarding the end being imminent. He lingered for a moment, and when we stood up to approach him, he left. We continued our night by monitoring the cameras and making occasional rounds. At one point, we noticed something unusual on one of the security feeds, something that definitely should not have been there. It was the camera located around the 95th floor, if I recall correctly, which displayed the corridor and clearly showed a solid figure dressed in black pacing back and forth. This continued for several moments, and we contemplated going up to investigate. But before we could do so, the figure vanished. When morning came on September 11th, the sky was partially clear and I felt extremely hungry. People began arriving at the building around 7:08 a.m., and since there were two of us assigned to the lobby post, I told my partner I was going across the street to get something to eat. He didn't mind and just asked me to return quickly. It was roughly 8:15 a.m. when I crossed the street and entered a convenience store, ready to look for something to eat. I was indecisive because I wanted both something sweet and something salty, but wasn't exactly sure what. After much thought, I finally made up my mind. There was a small line at the register, maybe 3 or 4 people. I can't recall precisely. I do remember feeling impatient since I needed to get back. Yet I experienced an indescribable sense of anguish once again. When it was finally my turn at the counter, the cashier took longer than usual because she didn't have the right change and the card reader wasn't working properly. Since I frequented the store often, I told her to keep the change and that I would grab it later, to which she agreed. That was the moment I heard the first loud explosion. It was a powerful noise that shook the shelves of the store. My immediate thought was that it might be an earthquake, but as soon as I stepped outside, I witnessed one of the most terrifying scenes of my life. Debris and papers were falling from the sky, and thick black smoke was billowing from the upper section of the South Tower. Something had occurred, but from the ground, it was impossible to determine exactly what it was. Suddenly, I felt something strike my shoulder with force. When I looked down, I saw it was a human hand. I was in shock, and soon after, more pieces of bodies' clothing and glass began crashing onto the street. I moved away to protect myself, glancing toward the lobby where I observed some people exiting. Some struggling, others injured. Then I heard the sounds of sirens, with police, firefighters, and ambulances blaring in the distance. A few minutes later, I heard a second explosion-like sound, but this time it appeared to originate from the North Tower. Several people around me claimed they witnessed a plane crash into the North Tower amid all the chaos. I chose to assist and returned to the building lobby to help some people evacuate. At that moment, I don't think anyone expected the towers to fall, which is why so many were nearby aiding the injured. The firefighters established a perimeter and instructed everyone to keep their distance from the towers as a precaution. When I went back into the lobby, I heard a voice that seemed to come from within my mind, urging me to escape immediately. I looked around and noticed a little girl, so I rushed to her, picked her up, and ran behind the safety perimeter. She appeared to be fine, but I knew she needed to be checked by a medic. While holding her, I asked if she was hurt, whether she felt okay, and where her parents were. She simply pointed toward the building, so I inquired about which floor, but she remained silent and pointed again at the tower. I gently set her down behind a nearby barrier and assured her that I would get help. The moment I turned around, the entire building collapsed, and the street was engulfed by a thick cloud of dust, debris, and human remains. I attempted to shield my head with my right arm as visibility plummeted to only a few feet in any direction. When I turned back to speak to the girl, she had vanished. I searched everywhere, but there was no trace of her. After the tower fell, the chilling silence around us was overwhelming. It was over. I was in shock, unable to comprehend what I was witnessing. It felt like a dream. That's when I recalled the dream I'd had, where everything appeared just like this, suffused with dust, making it hard to recognize my surroundings, which is why in the dream I hadn't known where I was. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was my wife, frantic and fearing I might be one of the victims from that horrific attack. Thankfully, I managed to escape with only minor injuries from flying debris. Even now, I reflect on everything that transpired, the dreams I experienced, and the voice I heard telling me to leave. And I firmly believe that the young girl who appeared in the lobby and disappeared when the South Tower collapsed was an angel sent there to rescue me before it happened. Or else I might have been among the victims of that terrible incident. I appreciate you hearing my story. Let's move on to the next story. If you're enjoying the content, please leave a like. It's free and really helps the channel. Good evening, everyone. My name is Eric, and I am the eldest in a family of 8 siblings. We grew up in a small town located in the American Midwest. The story I'm about to tell you revolves around my youngest sister, Jenna, and it changed our lives forever. Jenna always had a pure heart and grand aspirations, while her siblings, including myself, were satisfied with more modest personal and professional achievements. She yearned for something more significant. This desire drove her to take a courageous step to leave our hometown in pursuit of better prospects in New York City. It was in 1999 when Jenna shared her plan to pack her belongings and head to the Big Apple. Despite our natural concerns about someone so young and beloved venturing out on her own, we offered our unwavering support. We could see the determination in her eyes and believed she had the ability to accomplish whatever she set her mind to. Our family has always been closely tied to our faith, regularly attending a local spiritual center. I'll admit that I was the least religious among us, but I respected the fervent beliefs of my parents and siblings. It was this very faith that led us to seek counsel from spiritual entities before any significant decisions came up in our lives. So, before departing for New York, Jenna insisted on visiting the spiritual center on a day called Jira to seek guidance. It was our family's tradition, a method of requesting divine assistance and direction. On that day, while I spoke with a Pertuvelo, Jenna was counseled by a boy named Theo. I anxiously asked the Pertuvelo if my sister's journey would be successful and if she would discover the happiness she was seeking. His words were comforting, assuring that everything would be all right. Meanwhile, the boy Theo, who was advising Jenna, was even more emphatic, declaring that she would find great joy in the city and that life had significant victories in store for her. Those messages filled us with hope and happiness. The arrangements for her departure were made amidst a mix of excitement and anxiety, with each passing day bringing us closer to her travel date and our emotions running high. When the big day finally arrived, we couldn't hold back our tears. We cried not only for the impending loss we felt, but also out of pure joy for watching our girl chase her dreams. Jenna left with our prayers, our trust, and our unwavering love in her heart. It wasn't long before the good news began to flow in. Shortly after her arrival in New York, Jenna secured a job at a small diner where her warmth and charm quickly impressed everyone. Before long, she received an invitation to be a tour guide, an opportunity she eagerly accepted. We followed her progress from a distance, cheering her on every step of the way. Jenna had always been loving and considerate towards us, and despite the geographical gap and her busy life, she made it a point to call often. If she was unable to speak directly, she would leave thoughtful voicemails, ensuring we felt her love and presence even from afar. As time passed, Jenna's career flourished. She studied diligently, refined her abilities, and soon became an official tour guide in New York City. This job brought her immense fulfillment as it allowed her to share her passion for the vibrant city with visiting tourists. The Twin Towers, the iconic symbols of the Big Apple, were a key part of her tours. Each day, she guided groups through the World Trade Center, exuding her enthusiasm and expertise. Nothing could have prepared our family for the tragedy that would unfold on the morning of September 11, 2001. Our mother awoke with a puzzling discomfort, struggling to breathe, feeling an overwhelming pressure on her chest. Worried, I chose to take her to the hospital, even though it was my day off. Tests revealed no obvious issue with her physical health, but she remained under observation due to her emotional distress. While I sat with her in the hospital room, she urged me to try contacting Jenna. A knot formed in my stomach, indicating something was wrong. I attempted to call my sister repeatedly, but the calls just wouldn't connect. I assumed she was occupied with yet another group of tourists, trying to ease Mom's anxiety. I switched on the television in the hospital room, but the visuals we encountered left us utterly stunned. Footage of airplanes crashing into the Twin Towers played repeatedly. A devastating terrorist assault was occurring right in the heart of Manhattan, where my sister worked each day. Terror and despair enveloped me as I endlessly tried to contact Jenna, while Mom couldn't be comforted, crying uncontrollably. Through her tears, she repeatedly said our girl wouldn't come back, that God had taken her. I held on to the faint hope that it was merely a bad dream, but that hope was cruelly shattered when both towers fell before us. The moment the World Trade Center collapsed was horrifying beyond belief. Unable to bear the overwhelming grief, Mom went into cardiac arrest, and doctors and nurses rushed in to help her as I stood there, frozen and paralyzed by shock and disbelief. That night, I kept vigil over Mom while she slept in her hospital bed, awaiting the arrival of my siblings who lived in other cities. Exhausted and tormented, I dozed off briefly and had a disturbing dream. I saw Jenna amidst the rubble and thick smoke, appearing calm but with profound sorrow on her face. She didn't say anything, only nodded when I asked if she was okay. That image filled me with despair. Upon waking, I noticed that Mom had her hand outstretched as if someone were holding it. Between sobs, she uttered that she was saying goodbye to Jenna, mourning the immeasurable loss. The hospital room was filled with the unmistakable scent of my sister's perfume, Eternity by Calvin Klein. Even though she was not physically present, the hours that followed were a whirlwind of emotions as we watched the news in disbelief, learning about the vast impact of the attacks. Then came the confirmation we dreaded. Jenna's name appeared on the official list of the missing from the World Trade Center that tragic morning. It felt like a punch to the gut. Part of me still refused to accept it, but the harsh truth was undeniable. Our sweet girl, our angel, was gone forever, a victim of an unimaginable tragedy. The shock and sorrow of losing her were overwhelming. In the days that followed, we clung to the desperate hope that survivors might be pulled from the wreckage. With every name announced on the news, we felt a flicker of hope mixed with dread. However, as time passed, we heard no news of Jenna, making her absence painfully real and increasingly heartbreaking. Mom was inconsolable. She couldn't accept that her daughter wouldn't be returning. She spent hours staring at Jenna's pictures, especially the ones where she smiled in front of the New York skyline with the Twin Towers in the background, as if through those images she could keep Jenna alive in her memory. I, who had always been the least attached to our faith, began to question everything we believed. How could the higher powers, those who had promised Jenna a bright future, allow her to face such a horrific fate? Anger and disbelief consumed me. Gradually, harsh reality set in. We had to acknowledge that Jenna wouldn't be coming back, and there would be no body to grieve over, no grave to visit. The pain of losing her would remain, a wound that time could never fully heal. Now, 2 decades later, Jenna's absence continues to be felt in our lives. Mom has never fully recovered, bearing the deep sadness of losing a child in such a violent and abrupt manner. As for me, even though I drifted from faith, I still search for answers, seeking meaning amidst such profound grief. Even in the wake of overwhelming tragedy, one thing can never be erased: the love we shared, especially our love for Jenna. Her joyful spirit, kindness, and adventurous soul live on in our hearts and minds. If I've learned anything from this heartbreaking experience, It's that life is delicate and unpredictable, urging us to treasure every moment with our loved ones, as we never know when it could be our last. And even in the aftermath of the worst tragedies, love and family unity are the forces that support us and help us move forward. Although Jenna left us too soon, her legacy of love and courage persists. It is that legacy that motivates us to face each day, to honor her memory, and to keep hope alive for a better world. Thank you for listening and for letting me share a part of my family's story. May Jenna's memory and the memory of all the victims from that September 11th never fade away. And may we strive together for a future filled with greater peace, understanding, and respect among all people. Good night, and may God bless you all. Sincerely, Eric. If you're enjoying this content, please give it a like. Good evening. My name is Miranda, and I'm here to share a life-changing experience. It's a story filled with mystery, inexplicable phenomena, and above all, how the bond between a mother and her daughter can overcome even the darkest tragedies. My journey started when I secured a job as a receptionist at Morton & Associates, a law firm on the 89th floor of the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City. As someone new to the city that never sleeps, this was the realization of a dream. Every day, I would rise at 6:30 in the morning, prepare my little Z, who was just 2 years old at the time, drop her off at daycare, and then navigate the bustling subway and streets of Manhattan on my way to work. It was a demanding routine, but it filled me with pride. Pride in creating a better life for my daughter and me. Pride in being part of a respected firm in one of the world's most iconic cities. However, nothing could have foreseen the strange occurrences that began the night before that tragic September 11th. On September 10th, 2001, around 6 p.m., I was at reception organizing files and preparing to end my day. The office was mostly empty, with most employees having left. That's when an unexpected chill swept through me, like an icy shiver deep within my bones. The lights flickered 3 times, and from the corner of my eye, I spotted a dark figure darting swiftly down the hallway. My heart raced, thinking it might be an employee who had forgotten something. But when I went to investigate, there was nobody there. The corridors were deserted and silent, as if that shadowy presence had never existed. I tried to convince myself it was merely fatigue and that my mind was playing tricks on me after a long day. But things only became more bizarre from that moment on. Later that night, around 11 p.m., Z woke up crying, burning with a fever. The thermometer read 104 degrees, something that had never happened before. I was filled with dread. My daughter, typically so healthy and energetic, was now trembling and sweating. Her little eyes glossed over with fever. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, she started having convulsions. During the taxi ride to the hospital, I held her in the back, desperately trying to bring her temperature down as she began to utter incoherent words. Yet among the jumbled sounds, 3 words stood out, repeated like a frantic mantra. Plane, fire, and something that sounded like 8:45. At the time, I didn't give it much thought. I was solely focused on getting to the hospital as quickly as possible to ensure she received the necessary care. The doctors examined her thoroughly, running numerous tests, but couldn't pinpoint any specific issue. They suspected some sort of virus that would require time and careful observation. We stayed at the hospital until 5 a.m., and though Z was still feverish and very restless, I knew I wouldn't be able to go to work that day. With a heavy heart, I called the office and spoke with Susan, the head secretary. I explained the situation and was relieved when she was very understanding, telling me to prioritize taking care of my daughter. We returned home, and despite my exhaustion, I couldn't sleep. There was an inner restlessness I couldn't quite understand keeping me alert. At 8:45 that morning, while bathing Z to help reduce her persistent fever, something happened that I will never forget. Julie, who had been lethargic and nearly unresponsive until that moment, suddenly became still. Her eyes locked onto mine with an unsettling intensity, as if she could see through me. Then, with a clarity that seemed uncharacteristic for a 2-year-old, she said, "Mommy, the plane." And at that precise moment, my cell phone began to ring. I in the living room. My friend Helena was there, and from the urgency in her voice, I instantly recognized that something horrific had occurred. She was shouting for me to turn on the TV, claiming it was an emergency. My heart racing, I rushed to the living room and flipped on the television just in time to witness a sight I never expected to see. A plane had collided with the North Tower of the World Trade Center, and not just anywhere, but precisely on the floor where I should have been at that very moment, the floor occupied by Morton and Associates. Flames engulfed the building as thick black smoke poured from the broken windows, consuming everything in its vicinity like an unquenchable beast. In that moment, my life shattered as I realized that all my coworkers, people I interacted with daily, were still there. Barry, always so compassionate and supportive. Kane, the attorney who treated me with dignity. Asma, my lunch partner and confidant. None of them made it. In the days that followed, while the city and the entire world mourned and began to comprehend the magnitude of the tragedy, I found myself caught in a storm of emotions. Shock, sorrow, and guilt for having survived. Amid all this chaos, Z's fevered words came back to haunt me. It was 8:45, precisely when the plane hit the tower. How could my daughter have known? And what about that shadow I noticed in the office the night before? Could it be that something or someone had attempted to alert us? What kind of forces beyond my comprehension had intervened, placing Z's sudden illness in our path that day, keeping me from being at the World Trade Center that dreadful morning? These are questions I will never find definite answers to. Z, now 24, doesn't recall anything from that night. To her, it's merely another tale her mother recounts. An incredible story of how we narrowly escaped one of the most tragic events in recent history. But for me, it remains a vivid memory, an emotional burden I carry to this day. For a long time, I wondered why we were the ones selected to receive that warning out of so many people, so many precious lives lost. Why were we spared? I eventually concluded that some things are beyond our understanding, that mysteries exist in this world that we may never completely solve. Yet, one thing I know for sure is that the bond between a mother and daughter is a powerful force. It's a force capable of moving mountains, defying logic, and perhaps even altering fate's course. If that very love was what kept us safe from the tower that morning, then I can only express my gratitude, thankful for each new day beside my daughter, grateful to witness her growth into the remarkable woman she is today, and fortunate to share our story in hopes of providing comfort or perspective to those who, like us, have been impacted by this tragedy. Because if there's one lesson I've learned from all this, it's that life is both precious and unpredictable. We should treasure every moment and every person we love. Even in the darkest times, there's always a guiding light, whether it be the strength of our love or the unseen hand of fate. Thank you for listening to me. If you've made it this far, please leave a comment and let me know which city you are watching from. Now, let's proceed to the final story of this night. Good evening, I'm Kevin, and I'm here to share a story that affected my family in September 2001. A heartbreaking event that has left a lasting imprint on every part of our lives. My father was a commercial director at a multinational firm, a devoted man passionate about his work, even if it meant confronting some of his fears, like his anxiety about flying. In early September of that year, he was scheduled to attend several events and trade fairs in New York along with other board members. The night before his trip, my mother had an uneasy feeling. Something inside her told her that this journey should not occur. She even questioned my father about whether he truly needed to go, and he explained the importance of this trip for his job and career advancement. Though he hesitated, he ultimately felt compelled to board that flight. The day before his departure, My parents chose to dine out alone at a famous pizzeria in Chicago, a place they reserved for special moments. During their meal, they requested the waiter to take a photo of them, wanting to capture that moment as if they somehow sensed it might be one of their last. My father flew to New York on Tuesday, September 4th, planning to return home on the 18th. In the meantime, on Saturday, they had the dinner photos developed, and it was then that we observed something peculiar. There was a dark smudge beside my father in every picture, resembling a shadow, something difficult to explain, and in one image, his face appeared burnt. This deeply troubled my mother, and that same day, she tried to get in touch with my father, but she was unable to reach him. Her calls wouldn't connect. We assumed it might be a phone line issue or a problem with the time zones, but my mother instinctively sensed something was amiss. On Monday, my father left a message on the answering machine at home, telling my mother how much he loved her and that he missed us. He also described how awed he was by New York, how everything seemed grand and bustling. He appeared excited despite his lifelong fear of heights. On the morning of Tuesday, September 11th, my father was attending a meeting at the World Trade Center. He and several colleagues from his company were meeting an important client whose offices were located in one of the Twin Towers. That same morning, I was in school when the principal entered my classroom with a grave look on her face and asked me to come to her office. Once there, she informed me that a terrible event had occurred in New York and that my mother was on her way to pick me up. I had no comprehension of the enormity of the tragedy until I got home and saw my mother in tears in front of the television, watching as both towers had been struck by hijacked planes, leading to their collapse and claiming thousands of lives, including my father's. Those were painful days. As the days passed and my father's name appeared on the list of missing, we had to come to terms with the fact that he would not be returning home and that there would be no funeral. We were in a state of denial and despair because we couldn't believe that he had passed away so abruptly and tragically. My mother, who had already struggled with depression, sank into a deeper state of despair and refused to leave her room or eat properly. She was constantly looking at the pictures from the dinner, particularly the one where my father's face appeared to have been burned over time. At first, I assumed that my mother's claims that she could still feel my father's presence and that he visited her at night were a way for her to cope with her grief. However, things became more troubling when she claimed that my father's spirit was upset that he blamed the company for his death, claiming that he appeared with a disfigured face and yelling that they knew about the risks but sent him there anyhow. At that point, I noticed that her right hand was beginning to wither. The skin turned pale and thin, and her fingers curled in on themselves, giving the appearance of a corpse. I took my mother to multiple doctors, but none could explain what was happening. They all claimed there was nothing clinically wrong, but I knew something horrible was happening because my mother was wasting away day by day due to this haunting. She claimed that every night my father would come to her and hold her hand, telling her that he would take her away soon. I tried everything: therapy, medication, and even a few desperate religious rituals, but nothing helped. It seemed as though my father was actually there, unable to accept his untimely, tragic death. 20 years later, my mother is still living in the shadow of that tragedy. Her hand has never recovered, and her mental health is fragile. Though I'll never be able to answer those questions, I do know that day changed everything. Not just for my family, but for the entire world. And the scars it left on the US are as real and profound as those on the Manhattan skyline. I try to support her as much as I can, but it's difficult to watch someone you love deteriorate like this. Sometimes I find myself thinking about those pictures of the shadow next to my father. Did he somehow know, or was he trying to warn us? I hope that our story will serve as a reminder of the terrible impact that a tragedy like this can have on the lives of those it affects. Above all, I hope it provides some solace to those who, like us, had their lives irrevocably altered by the tragic events of September 11. Thank you for giving us the chance to tell our story on your channel. If this experience can serve as a warning or a reflection for someone, then maybe our family's suffering wasn't in vain. We would like to extend a heartfelt hug to everyone who watched, and may we always remember those we lost. No matter what, for those of you who are already a member of the family, we sincerely appreciate your support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, click the subscribe button and ring the bell to ensure you don't miss our upcoming stories.